Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest Platinum Physiotherapy and Personal Training live Facebook webinar. And today's topic is an interesting one, and one that we have done lots of seminars over the 12 years or so that Platinum has been going to many clubs and groups around the region, and that is on the H word, hypermobility. And it's a very important word in the context of physiotherapy for children and adults. Hypermobility is a very interesting subject and one that we're going to talk about today. If you've got any questions as we go along, just pop them on. I'll try and answer them if we're not answering them already in the context of the seminar, and it'll be interesting to see what you think about hypermobility, which we call the H word, after we talk to you today. So we'll get straight into it. For those that don't know me, my name is Neil. I've been a physiotherapist for about 23 years now, and I've always been specialising in paediatrics, younger patients, and sporting injuries and activities. So the word hypermobility has always been around me from the very first day that I worked in the Children's Hospital in Sydney in Australia. Over those 23 years, the word hypermobility, I think it's changed in the perception of it. It's a very interesting change that I've seen, and I certainly think of it very differently to what I would have all those years ago. And that's really important to understand, because some people's views on hypermobility may be outdated. In my experience, is something that we pick up quite often. It's really important. Once the hypermobility word is used, particularly without justification, as a potential diagnosis, then I think it has some potential repercussions that are not necessarily positive, in the same way that more recent seminars that we've done on the S word, sciatica, and another word, the stress fracture, in a very similar pigeonhole. If you're using these kind of terms like hypermobility, sciatica, and stress reactions without justification, it may not be the best way to help someone get better, particularly if it's said at that early stage without proof or justification. And that's why the questions that you should ask health professionals should say, okay, if this is what it is, why? And then let's go from there. So let's do a test that we would normally do in the clubs and the groups where we do the hypermobility seminars. I don't mind if you write the comments in the thread on the Facebook Live, and I'll try and keep an eye on it. When I say the word hypermobility, I would normally say to the group I'm talking to, can you put your hand up if you feel it's positive? And I would have a look. Or would you put your hand up if you feel it's negative? So anyone that wants to type now, and there's enough of you logged on, just write down positive or negative in the comments box. Hopefully it'll come up on my screen here when I say the word hypermobility. I'll give it 10 seconds just for those that are going to actually be able to type with where they are. Is it positive or negative? And we'll have a little bit of a look and see what people's initial response to that word is. Now, while people are doing that, and I might add it up later on for those that have typed, I see it as a positive. And we're going to talk about why now this particular seminar is about this. I can see the comments are just starting to roll through, positive or negative, of what people are going to write. Why? Well, I'm going to start with this. If the word hypermobility was always negative, then why would that gymnast be in that position at the Olympic level, doing the rings in the middle, the side? You can see the female gymnast in a very advanced position, bottom row another gymnast. You've got a baseball thrower who's definitely got an elbow that seems to be moving in an interesting position. You've got a high jumper, and then you've got someone doing the splits at the bottom side. We turn it round, and this is where it really becomes important. These people, feel they've got medals around their necks there, they're smiling. And that's why hypermobility was always a negative word. How would these be able to exist? So that's really important. I think we'll hang on, the pictures tell a story there. Is it hypermobility, or is it excellent flexibility with excellent strength, as this side of the page would suggest? These people may have excellent flexibility to achieve what they need to do. They must have excellent strength, but it doesn't have to be at the top level. Therefore, hence the reason I've got some younger athletes there, younger dancers, all smiling. If hypermobility was an issue and they were doing sports that involve flexibility, then they must also have enough strength to allow them to achieve what they want to put the smiles on their faces. That's why, to me, hypermobility is a positive thing. It's whether you have the strength with the flexibility that the task, sport, activity demands. And that's how I view it, rather than saying you've got hypermobility and treating that as a negative. Anyone that's had treatment here at Platinum, particularly the gymnasts, will know that I've had this conversation with many, many patients, and the reassurance that it gives the parents is very, very important, because it drives the younger athlete or even adults with this potential problem towards the activity, towards doing things, making good health choices, rather than away. Because actually, a lot of the time when the H word is said inappropriately and prematurely, it drives people away from the activity, which then opens up the door for many long-term health problems, not least if it's done at a young age. And if you're telling a child that it's a negative thing to do a sport or activity because of something called hypermobility, what happens if that child never regains that passion to do activity, whatever sport it is? Longer term, I know which one would be the problem for me. Let's talk about some myths. This is really important. Myth number 1, my child is double jointed. I don't know if people want to put comments. If you've said this, had it said to you, it's untrue. There's no such thing as double jointed. It's not something strange that a joint does this and that and the other. All joints do what they do. So we don't agree that the words double jointed should ever have been used and they're not used anymore. It doesn't mean anything. It is actually meaningless. The second thing is, and this is the one that always comes up, but my child's hypermobile because they can do this with their elbow and this with their thumb, and a doctor or whoever told me that this means they're hypermobile. No, untrue. That is not something that's ever been scientifically proven to link to a certain condition. Some people are more flexible than others, children and adults, and these simple tests by themselves, in the absence of a medical condition that I'll talk about soon, does not mean that just because you can do this that you're hypermobile. I'll give a clear example. If someone were to dislocate the elbow badly, we would expect that elbow would move more than the other one. So hang on, what do we do with that test now? That one moves, that one doesn't move as much. Does that mean you're hypermobile? I'll expand on that very soon. Third myth, my child is hypermobile because they take after me. No. The questioning of the initial diagnosis in the older generation would come to question immediately if that thought process was there. We would want to see what is going on in the older person, but no, you would not say just because an adult was more flexible that their child would inherit that particular sort of trait. Want of a better word, I'll use a simple example. Dad might be a rugby player, the mother might not have done much sport, as an example. Does that mean that the child doing gymnastics would have the same flexibility outcomes as mum and dad? And conversely, if the mother was a dancer and that the father might have done a sport like tennis and the child wasn't as active, would you expect the same flexibility? I don't think I could expect that to happen. So there's a lot more going on than suspected genetic traits there. The last one, because I sprained my ankle, I must be hypermobile. No, untrue. That is an injury. You can have an injury no matter what spectrum you're on in terms of flexibility, and we'll be covering the importance of strength in the context of that statement. I will quite simply use my own example. I was dislocating both shoulders by the age of 18. They were both sport related. I got to double figures on both sides in dislocations. It did not mean I was hypermobile. It meant I had a shoulder that was constantly popping out on either side, and I had a reconstruction. I've had a perfect result since the age of 21, never dislocated since, but I wouldn't consider myself hypermobile. In my knee, I ruptured my cruciate ligament about 13 years ago playing football, and I didn't have a reconstruction. I've rehabilitated successfully, as I've talked about in other seminars. Again, it doesn't make me hypermobile. It was the injury that has given that extra flexibility in the context of the knee that I didn't really want at the time, but it's turned into a positive because now I have a very strong knee with no instability, even though I don't have a cruciate ligament in it. So again, no injury relationship to I must have hypermobility. Mine was sports injuries that sports people get. So hypermobility syndrome. There's differing views, and I think many are inaccurate and unproven. I think people jump the gun sometimes, and that's a really important thing, not to jump the gun. You've got to get a correct diagnosis, and I don't think hypermobility is that first port of call diagnosis. There are certain conditions of which hypermobility is one of the symptoms that these conditions have. See the difference? Hypermobility is a symptom of something else. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, people that have heard of it will know about it. Extra flexibility and hypermobility is accepted as a trait in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, along with the nutritional, the stomach problems, the anxieties that sometimes these people have with these kind of conditions. Hypermobility is one of a network. Marfan syndrome is another one. So it doesn't mean the child has hypermobility as a diagnosis, but we expect these children, if it's a younger person, to be more clumsy and less coordinated because of the changes in the tissue structure of the collagen in these conditions. Very different to being told you have a hypermobility as a diagnosis. And conversely, these children particularly can get very strong by addressing these weaknesses, which we'll talk about. So again, we're turning it into a positive. Another interesting one that comes up a lot here, pregnant women. But I've got hypermobility. When you're pregnant, as people may not know, the hormone relaxin comes in during the pregnancy to allow things to expand. Therefore, coordination, strength, clumsiness, spraining ankles can come into the pregnancy through the action of the relaxin hormone. Does that mean you're hypermobile? I would suggest not, because in the absence of injury, when the pregnancy finishes, particularly if the lady's quite active and doing activity and exercise, then they will regain a lot of those things that they may have felt they lost during pregnancy. So it doesn't mean they have a hypermobility syndrome. It means that they have the normal changes we would expect with a pregnancy, and then post-labor, we would expect them to change with the right activity levels. So think about what people say to you, justification for why they would say it. So what is hypermobility? Well, let's go there simply. All joints are supported by active and passive structures. Active, you're in charge of. Passive, you're not. The same as smoking. Active, smoking, you make the decision. Passive smoking, I'm not a smoker. I might be bringing in someone else's smoke passively. Active and passive, very important with what I'm about to tell you. The passive structures are the ligaments of the body. The ligaments join a bone to a bone, like my cruciate ligament that I don't have anymore, like the ligaments in my shoulder that were being stretched every time my shoulder dislocated. I don't have any control over those. Passive. Active, the muscles that control the movement of a joint, that we have complete control of. We decide when I do a bicep curl, when I straighten my elbow. To give stability to a joint, the active muscles decide what happens, and if the active structures fail, the passive structures come into play. I can choose to have the cigarette, I may not. If I'm around smokers, the passive structures are then coming into my world, even though I've chosen not to smoke. It's exactly the same thing with the body. If your active muscle strength and control is brilliant, then in a perfect world, we would never need ligaments. We would never need the last line of defense. As my cruciate knee proves, the textbook says I shouldn't be able to do a lot of twisting activities without a cruciate ligament. I've done all of my Ironman triathlons and cross-country races since 2006 when I ruptured my knee cruciate ligament without the ligament. Because my active structures are so good, I can run on the mud without any knee instability. So my active structures are taking the role of the passive one that in my body doesn't exist. So that's important, active versus passive. The stability then becomes the key, and that's where the person who might be clumsy and weak and injuring themselves has an opportunity to rebuild where that loss is. So let's do a simple test. I would love it if you can do it, even though I can't see you all. We're going to bring in the word proprioception, which is the ability to know where your body is in space. So if you can, stand up. I'd love for you to do this. I'm going to face you so you can see. You'll see my blue trainers. I'm going to stand on one leg, just like that. If you can, stand on one leg, hold the knee up in front of you, 5 or 10 seconds, and then I want you to do change legs. Let's do the other leg. Let's see if the proprioception on one leg, the standing leg, is better or worse than the other, or is that identical? Now we're going to go back to the first leg. This time, when the leg is in the air, I want you to close your eyes safely, only if it's safe. You need to hold on to something, of course, do so. I'm going to close my eyes now. I'm working harder. I'm still there, just working hard and come back down. So I kept my control fairly well. I'm used to doing this exercise, of course. I'm closing my other eyes when the other leg's in the air, working hard, a little bit weaker on that one. Happens to be my weaker leg in the context of the injury. That's what proprioception looks like. I took my eyes open and shut. I saw, was there a difference? Not a massive difference in my part. Some of you may have noticed a difference. Please type now if you had a big difference between eyes open and eyes shut. It can go either way. Some people are better with their eyes closed because they have good proprioception and they use the muscles better. Other people, they close their eyes and the proprioception falls off a cliff and they feel like they're going to fall. So type better eyes closed or open. Second thing, were you equal or was there a big difference that you didn't know about in your proprioception on one side versus the other? If you have any comments that people have found a massive difference, type them or keep an eye there about the eyes closed and shut, and was there a one-sided weakness? That's what proprioception looks like in a nutshell, because once you take the vision out of the way, you're relying not on your eyes anymore and your ability to talk to the brain with the eyes, but the ability of your muscles to work to stop you from falling in what is a relatively straightforward test and one that we use all the time with a lot of injuries. So if the active support is poor, as in you have weaker muscles and no good control there, passive support is ineffective, as in, you might be in positions where the ligaments can't really do anything, then the symptoms may suggest an element of hypermobility as opposed to hypermobility as a diagnosis. And that's really important to make that separation. The person with some of those medical conditions or the pregnancy, completely different situation to someone who does that test without those conditions and has a poor outcome on those tests. One may be medically related, the other one clearly isn't. So now let's go to common signs and symptoms in particularly children that may have been classed as hypermobile. We're going to look at the signs and the symptoms, and there's 5 broad areas that I'd like to touch on: weakness, pain, fatigue, instability, and coordination. And anyone that's had the hypermobile word circle around them in some point in time will recognize at least 1, if not 5, of those 5 things. Let's talk about weakness. The muscles cannot produce enough or adequate strength for simple daily tasks, such as writing, particularly at school, gripping, doing things with fine dexterity because they haven't got the strength, prolonged standing. Who's had a child that seems to be a bit fidgety with prolonged standing? It could be to do with the weakness in the muscles, not the fidgetiness that is causing that problem. And it looks different to what it is. And squatting. A lot of children don't like squatting if they're weaker because it hurts when they can't do it because the muscles are tired. Obviously, the fix would be to build up the strength. So that's muscle weakness. The second thing, pain. The child may experience pain due to weakness around those affected areas, such as the muscle pain of squatting when you don't have much strength in your thigh muscles, such as shoulder or arm pain if the younger person particularly isn't that strong with lifting activities and getting dressed. Pain can be a real symptom, but let's turn into a positive. What do we do to fix it rather than retreat and tell the child not to do that activity, which is not going to help if they're not doing any strength work to help it anyway. And it can be sudden or it can come over a longer period. You want to be able to monitor that. Obviously, as an adult, you will identify activities yourself, and then we find the strategies to build up the strength, to help that pain that you have through those problems. And so look for signs of discomfort, particularly in children. People that are constantly changing position is a bit of a clue. The way they're moving their arms and legs, you can usually see this kind of problem. Third one, fatigue. Different parts to fatigue. Joint fatigue, aching feeling around the body parts, such as, again, the knee might ache if you've got a child that has weak thigh muscles. That could be an aching feeling. It could be muscle fatigue, the muscles tired, as we've talked about. Or you've got overall fatigue due to increased effort. If someone's getting tired because they're not as strong, like a marathon runner, never trained for a marathon, is going to get tired in the marathon earlier than someone that's trained for it. So overall fatigue actually comes into this hypermobility world, but actually they got stronger and the fatigue levels dropped, then of course all of the outcomes would be positive and maybe the hypermobility was never in the picture in the first place. So it's important to recognize that. Fourth one, we've touched on with my particular world venue, is instability, a result of trauma or incident, of which both of mine were. Repeated trauma will cause the instability to increase, as mine did. And then children with increased joint looseness, which is kind of varying with that hypermobile picture, are at higher risk of instability, hence the reason we want them to build up their active strength, get their muscles going rather than retreat, which will allow them to have much better outcomes and choices for their activities. So remember that. The child that's more clumsy may not want to be brought back to less activity, but safely taken to more activity. And we've had fantastic outcomes with younger patients in the last 10, 15 years, particularly by having this mindset, encouraging the schools, encouraging the sports. Ellis Danos, as an example, does very well with gymnastics and dancing because the sports demand strength, stability, balance, and skill. If you've got a child with hypermobile traits in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, those are going to be fixed with those sports, and we have many, many young gymnasts and dancers that will testify to that, and they're much better in all facets later on down the track for starting early. Fifth one, coordination. Due to a combination of factors above, the muscle weakness, the poor proprioception from that test, poor fine motor skills if they're doing Lego, confidence. We know children with poor coordination don't have great confidence. And then a new task, nervous to take on that new task if they're not sure if they've got the coordination. But what happens if it's the result of the other 4 things above? That gets dragged in this hypermobile situation. If they can't do a button, they haven't got great strength in their fingers, the confidence to dress themselves will go down. So you can see they're all connected. So what do? Strategies to address it. We're going to focus more on the children, but in adults we can still use the same things. It's all about making things fun. So they're wanting to do it, whether it's a child or adult. Repeating it, being able to keep on doing that activity regularly, being able to regress or progress, depending on how strong you are. As an example, the standing on one leg, being able to do it with the eyes closed, or being able to say, let's keep the eyes open in the context of the activity. So there's always going to be movement forwards in the task skill set to get stronger and better. And you can link it in and outside of school. Different in a COVID world, but definitely in and out of school links to activity have fantastic outcomes because the child now has two ways to get stronger, more confident, less clumsy, less hypermobile might be the perception of the parents, but it's actually the young person becoming stronger and more capable. So what do we do? Well, let's start at the hand. Let's start simple. I'll just use some simple things. Just a little bit of glue tack here. Of course, the Play-Doh, the plasticine. Lots of different things you can do to help all of these problems in a child that may have poor upper body strength. We could bring in the elastic, which doesn't have to be Dynaband. You've got lots of things. You could do exercises. The child might want to invent some games where you might do different shapes, rotations. You can bring in toys and things into this world. I'm just showing you simple things. We then bring in the ball activities, which is great. The dexterity of a soft ball. The ability for a child that's not that confident, just to start like this, to be able to throw it against the wall with one hand, throw it at the wall with the other. It's everything happening, coordination, strength, dexterity, a whole lot, confidence, fatigue. We bring in the lower body, and I'll go more of a basic level in a class environment. Wouldn't it be great if a lot of children did squats just with the teacher every now and then? Again, in a COVID world, not so easy. Can we do some activities in a home or class environment, standing on one leg? Can we bring in that ball again and do some throwing activities, standing on one leg? Let's see if there's a difference between one leg and the other. We're going to go a bit more dynamic. I've got the hurdle here. You can use anything at home, of course. You might do some good jumping activities. If your child's not capable of that, let's do some stepping. Let's go backwards. Let's go sideways. You make it fun and you make it into a game. If you're going for the balance, the coordination side of things, you could use a cushion at home. This is my Bosu ball. How long do you think my child will want to maybe try and stand on that? Can we turn that into a little bit of a challenge? If you can stand on that for 10 seconds, let's come to some kind of agreement. Let's have a little bit of extra TV time this Sunday night. If you can stand on that leg, on that pillow for 20 seconds. They're the kind of strategies we use. With things you have in your house, particularly if it's children, if it's adults, of course, you can be even more sort of inventive there with things you might use. Now, put any questions on the thread just before I go to the next bit of the seminar, which is the last bit before some questions. It ties into what we talked about a few weeks ago when Daniel presented on growing pains. If people didn't watch that webinar, please watch it. You can find it through the videos on our Facebook page. It links to the hypermobility often being thrown into the growing pains because apparently it's just accepted. It's not. Growing pains is an unacceptable diagnosis, almost as much as hypermobility in my personal view. Many specific conditions affect different body parts in the world of the growing pain group, and that's why we don't use the word growing pains. Osgood-Schlatter's is a specific condition to the knee, Sever's in the heel, Sherman's in the mid to lower back. Once upon a time, they would have all been called growing pains. Specific tests are used to confirm the diagnosis, and the treatment, all three above, is very, what we call aggressive. We get them getting strength work in. We do single leg standing. We do exercises. We make the muscle stronger. If the x-ray is needed for any of those growth type conditions, it will be done at the time that is indicated, but the vast majority of these ones will not need x-raying because they'll all respond very quickly, and rest is the worst thing you can do for the three conditions I've just described. The same with hypermobility, the growing pains conditions, rest is the worst thing you can do. A tight muscle will not get looser with rest. A weak muscle will certainly not get stronger, and I would suggest it will get worse. Someone with poor proprioception and balance will definitely get worse with rest. So the outcome of rest, unless there's a medical need, generally from an image like an x-ray, is rest is the worst thing that you can do for these conditions. So I hope that's answered a lot of questions about hypermobility, what it is, the myths about it, how we address it, how we diagnose it carefully before saying the H word. We don't use the H word in this clinic. We think about this. How do we want the children, particularly, but adults can sometimes carry this label through. And that's why we treat it very differently now in 2021. Now, there's a couple of minutes there, because we were trying to aim for just under half an hour. Let me just see if there's anyone that's got any questions. Please put them down. I'm just going to scroll down. I can see the negatives and positives. Now, we've got better eyes open, equal on both sides, better with eyes open. Eyes closed is hopeless, better eyes open, eyes open. So everyone that posted on there was better with the eyes open. It goes without saying, if you are safe and exercise in the no-brainer world for all of you, would be to try some single leg standing with the eyes closed, holding onto a wall initially for safely. Having said that, when you stand on a cushion or a pillow with your eyes open initially, you still get the same benefits of the proprioception because you're not looking down at the pillow. Even if you're looking forwards, standing on a pillow that's quite soft and marshmallow-like, you get the same benefits as closing your eyes, and then you would move on when ready there. Now, a couple of minutes there. Let's have some questions there because I think we've flown through that nicely. If there's anyone that has been labeled or diagnosed with hypermobility and wants to put a comment, I would love to know that. It's usually the case in the seminar environment that someone would put their hand up now and be happy to tell us a bit about that. But even if it's a question or a comment, that would be great. And I hope that we've covered something that I call an awkward subject today. However, we don't find it awkward because we deal with it all the time. Right, can you give any tips for building stamina? I find this more of a problem than strength per se. I would put them in the same boat, Liz. I think one leads to the other anyway. As a muscle gets stronger, you would expect the stamina to increase as an outcome anyway. So probably the key with that question is that you don't want to make the intensity too high if you feel stamina is an issue. Build up the strength and the stamina will come with it. That's really important. One of my best marathons personally was when I did way more strength work and a lot less running per se, just because where life was at the time. And it was actually my best marathon, definitely. From that strength work, my stamina built up through the strength work. It makes sense because I didn't get tired as quickly during that marathon. So it's more about keeping the intensity sort of under control. In my training, the strength work under intensity controlled situation was great. Built up my stamina, and then away I went. So I would build up the strength first in a safe way, nice sessions, and then let that stamina take care of itself. Rest for Osgood Clutters, I think the question for Emily is relevant. It's just potentially the way things were done many years ago, and I do stress many years ago. When I graduated in 1998, we would have treated someone with Osgood at the time in the physio room, but then probably advised them not to do any activity until we saw them, because that's how things were done. These days, it's not the way. We would treat them. We would send them away with exercises with high expectations. And my Osgood Schlatters patients are expected in a COVID world to do maybe 20 squats every hour. Then, at the end of however many days in agreement, we would get an update from them, and all being well, the person's made great progress. So that's really important that people know that rest is not the way forward for the reasons I've said there. So I hope that explains it. And you're allowed to ask why. Why should I rest this? And they might say, that's what will get it better. We would not say that because of the Osgood Schlatter being related to an underlying weakness. Yeah. Now, time for one more question there. I've just had a post note to check that the questions that I saw were the ones that my colleagues saw. Yep, so I've answered those two questions. If there's any other questions, pop them down now. Seminars coming up, please keep the topics coming in. We're going to try and keep it up once a week indefinitely. They're going very well, giving people the information they want. If you haven't seen the previous list of seminars, they are on a post on our Facebook page over the last week. It has all the seminars from last year into this year. There's about 30 of them, from sciatica, arthritis, core stability, working from home, all of these topics, and you can watch them over and over again, and that's important there. Right, so have a great rest of the day. Any other questions you think of after, just pop on the thread, obviously. Please share this video with people that might have been interested in watching that couldn't make it, and have a great rest of the day. We look forward to seeing you at the next seminar. Bye for now.